Nick Leggett, you've been wonderful this afternoon.
Kia ora, Nick.
Thank you so much both. I'm here for your 3:45 wonderful feedback today, and it's Power Ballad Friday tomorrow. See you then. It is Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, a lesson in solidarity. Thousands of teachers, kindy, primary and secondary walk off the job, demanding better conditions. Third time's a charm. The Prime Minister finally makes it to cyclone-smashed Wairoa. The town's mayor is live. A subsidised blue highway will see more freight go by sea between Gisborne and Napier rather than on busted-up roads. Eastland Port joins us live too. Derailed dreams. The government tells Auckland's mayor it's 50-50 on the CRL overrun. And New Zealand's halfway down recession road. So can we turn around now? Well, let's ask a top economist. And more teeth gnashing over a minister's self-described stuff-up.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Thousands of striking teachers urged Education Minister Jan Tinetti to walk the talk when she addressed a rally at Parliament today. Kindergarten, primary and secondary teachers throughout the country walked off the job over their stalled collective agreement negotiations. Ms Tinetti tried to reassure the strikers their demands have been heard.
Today is your day of action. Tomorrow we are back at the table. I am committing to getting this sorted. We value you, we absolutely see you and we hear you.
Jan Tinetti later told reporters she's confident the pay dispute will be settled. Nearly 1,000 schools told the Education Ministry they closed today because of the strike. It says the schools in question had more than 330,000 pupils. The figure doesn't include schools that cancelled classes but offered to supervise children who couldn't be left at home alone. The National Party says the state of the economy is a lot worse than expected. The latest data shows the economy contracted by 0.6% in the 3 months to the end of December, after a revised gain of 1.7% in the previous quarter. National's finance spokesperson Nicola Willis says people are paying the price for the government's poor economic management.
The Reserve Bank had said that we would grow in the last few months of last year. Instead, New Zealand shrank. It is very worrying because it means there are cracks opening up in our economy, and many New Zealanders are already in a very bad place. They're being crushed by the cost of living and rising interest rates, and this data tells us there's worse times ahead.
The Finance Minister says the 50-50 split to fund the country's largest infrastructure project still stands. City Rail Link has asked the Auckland Council for an extra $1 billion on top of the extra $1 billion given the nod in 2019. The jointly funded project has also been delayed by another year. Mayor Wayne Brown told RNZ today he'll be asking the Crown to pay more. But Grant Robertson says the 50-50 partnership arrangement between KiwiRail and Auckland Transport remains unchanged.
We have been carefully looking at where the costs are and making sure that we've provisioned for it. I would expect the Council to do the same.
The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment says major cities are losing green space right when climate change is making them hotter and wetter. A new report by Simon Upton shows that since the 1980s, green space per person fell by at least 30% in Auckland and more than 20% in Hamilton. Mr Upton says the urban landscape hasn't been built for what's coming.
The future won't look like the past, and we are eroding many of the services that are naturally provided, which could help us in the future. Time to take stock.
Simon Upton says the government needs to change the rules so councils have to require developers to provide green space rather than it just being a nice to have. The mother of a temp worker killed while driving another temp to work is calling on WorkSafe to investigate properly 4 years after the two men died. Jake Ginders and Floyd Harris died in a crash after the labour recruiting firm AWF helped them to carpool. Mr Harris shouldn't have been driving as he only held a learner licence, and that wasn't checked by AWF. WorkSafe briefly assessed the company's travel practices 7 months after the crash. At an inquest in Palmerston North today, Sharon Harris said the families deserve more.
I would like to ask the coroner to reopen a case with WorkSafe and this time include the families in their investigation.
Coroner Janet Anderson says she's considering sending the case back to WorkSafe. To sport now, and sprinter Zoe Hobbs won't be resting on her laurels at tonight's domestic season-ending Sir Graham Douglas Athletics meet in Waitakere, but doubts she'll be able to turn in a third straight sub-11-second 100 metres. In Sydney last weekend, Hobbs clocked 10.97 seconds to set an Oceania record, but she expects the conditions won't help her tonight.
There's not a time I'm targeting to run, to be honest. It's quite late at night. I've put it at 8:20pm, which is very hard to run fast that late at night. It's going to be cold, and also coming off the back of 2 very intensive weekends. It's a pretty big ask to go out and run a PB a third time.
Black Caps all-rounder Michael Bracewell could be in line for an Indian Premier League T20 contract. Cricinfo is reporting that Bracewell, who went unsold at the IPL auction, could join Royal Challengers Bangalore as an injury replacement. All Blacks midfielder David Havili and prop Tyrell Lomax have renewed their New Zealand rugby contracts, re-signing through to the end of 2025. The New Zealand women's team pursuit have won a silver medal at the Nations Cup track cycling competition in Cairo to seal qualification for the World Champs. And Liverpool have been eliminated from European football's Champions League, beaten 1-0 and 6-2 on aggregate by defending champs Real Madrid in their last 16-second leg match. Napoli reached the quarterfinals for the first time by beating Eintracht Frankfurt 3-0 and 5-0 on aggregate. That's the news.
Sympathy for teachers, but what's on the table?
I absolutely hear their concerns. I want them to be feeling valued. It's more than just about the remuneration.
Auckland's debt looms large.
It was like sailing towards an iceberg that we haven't quite seen yet come into view, and now here it is, right?
But is more debt the answer?
Borrowing your way into trouble is not the right thing to be doing at this stage here.
And what next for Stuart Nash?
Ministers shouldn't be talking to the Commissioner of Police and trying to have a discussion with them about what ought to happen in individual cases.
Probing the issues of the day. Morning Report weekdays at 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint right now. The short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Several severe weather warnings and watches are active. Severe northwest gales are possible about central and southern areas. For Whanganui, Manawatu, and from Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine today. High cloud with a few spots of rain tomorrow. For the remainder of Te Ika Maui, the North Island, cloud increasing today and isolated showers developing. Occasional rain tomorrow, sometimes heavy. Nelson and Marlborough, becoming cloudy with a few showers today. Rain with heavy falls overnight, then fine for a time tomorrow morning and afternoon. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, also the headwaters of Canterbury and Otago. Rain at times with heavy falls from this afternoon. Squally thunderstorms possible from tonight. For the remainder of Canterbury and Otago, also for Southland. High cloud with rain spreading east at times, possibly heavy in the south overnight. Thunderstorms possible in North Otago and Canterbury from tomorrow afternoon. And for Dekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, rain late tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines and any traffic news for you at 5:20.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tini rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Government Minister Stuart Nash is in more hot water tonight over revelations the Solicitor General considered prosecuting him for contempt. Our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch is with us now. Craig, what more can you tell us?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, details just coming to light still as we speak of a second indiscretion by Stuart Nash. This one happened in 2020, again during a News Talk ZB interview. In that interview, they were discussing the shooting of the young police officer Matthew Hunt, which took place in Auckland 2 years ago. They were speaking shortly after that. He said during that conversation that the police had arrested the man responsible and that he hoped that he would get a long sentence to reflect on what he had done. Now, those comments, of course, would be inappropriate. That case against Eli Epiha had not been completed at the time. The Solicitor General, we've learned, took a dim view of that. Crown Law has confirmed that at the time it raised concerns. It looked into the possibility of prosecuting Stuart Nash over these comments. That's how seriously they took it. Ultimately decided not to prosecute. The Solicitor General instead referred the matter to the Auditor General, David Parker, to rebuke him, which he did.
Is there any way that the current Prime Minister would be ignorant to this?
Well, this did happen in 2020. It is possible that it was, that would have happened under the leadership of Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, not Chris Hipkins. So it's unclear to what degree Chris Hipkins was aware at this stage. However, David Parker was the Auditor General then and remains the Auditor General now, so he certainly was. We have received a statement from the Prime Minister, and his position at the moment is that this was something that occurred in the past. The statement says the Attorney General was asked by the Solicitor General to speak to Minister Nash to convey that his comments were unacceptable. The Attorney General did that, and the Solicitor General considered the matter resolved to her satisfaction. Quote, this was in the past, end quote. He also goes on to say that the Minister, Stuart Nash, has lost his prized police portfolio and knows that he is on notice over any future serious errors of judgment. So it seems at this stage that the Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, regards this as a resolved and previous indiscretion, and that Stuart Nash, for now anyway, is safe in his other portfolios.
I suppose the issue here is that clearly he didn't learn from the earlier indiscretion, even though it went to a high level. There was a potential court case and a telling off, a rebuke, and he subsequently did it again.
Indeed, and it undermines the previous comment, which was that this was a one-off offence, which happened not that long ago. It begins to show potentially a pattern of offending. The ACT Party has already issued a statement on this describing Stuart Nash as a recidivist offender, and that there is no choice, they say, but for him to be sacked. So the National Party as well has climbed in on this, is equally forthright in their opinion. Stuart Nash must go from all his portfolios.
Thanks for the update, Craig. That is our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch. Angry, forgotten, underappreciated and out in their thousands today. Teachers up and down the country stepping out of the classroom to say enough is enough. Marching and chanting in rallies in the first ever joint strike by kindergarten, primary and secondary school teachers. They want the Education Ministry to offer better pay rises and better working conditions. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen and cameraman Samuel Rillstone have the story.
From kindergarten to secondary school, teachers have been offered the same pay rise, $6,000 or $7,000 over 2 years. And today they gathered in their thousands to say no thanks. At Parliament Grounds in Wellington, secondary teacher Melanie McGrath says teachers are underpaid, but the real problem is their working conditions.
I don't think I've ever felt as desperate as I do right now for education. It's very scary, the situation in schools at the moment, the amount of, feeling like we've got to cut corners to do our job.
Helen Tuapola has been a kindergarten teacher for 30 years. She says conditions have worsened and she's had enough.
I think we're feeling really angry, to be quite honest, because I think that during COVID the expectation was that teachers would carry on and continue to educate in whatever way we could, and we were seen as people that were necessary, but when life goes back to normal, we're forgotten.
Second-year maths teacher Jordan Hallis says she made more money per hour in her previous job as a bar manager.
It's pretty abysmal. I've had to budget quite a lot. Money's a stress for me, which it shouldn't be as a teacher. I have 2 undergraduate degrees. I have a postgraduate degree in order to be a teacher. None of that's required for hospitality.
Primary teacher Debs Burson says she's striking for the tamariki in her class.
We are overworked, overstressed, underpaid, and we we have a real crisis on our hands. We've got kids that are struggling and we don't have enough hours in the day.
Primary teacher Lou De Langa has been here before, having started teaching during the big teacher strikes of 2018 and 2019.
We were striking my first 2 years of teaching, and I look back on that and nothing has changed. It has just gotten worse.
Her colleague Katrina Terito says teachers are feeling despondent.
Something has to change. And even though pay isn't the main issue for any of us, it is a very real issue. I mean, I've got a son who, no qualifications, straight out of school, earning more than I earn after 25 years teaching. It's mind-blowing, really. Unbelievable.
In Auckland, thousands of teachers marched through Queen Street in the city centre, shouting for better conditions. Teacher Louisa Longoni says the strike is about more than pay.
If it was just about the pay, we would have accepted that offer ages ago. I mean, we're still asking for the same things that we were asking for back in 2019. We still have the same signs that we had back in 2019. We just want our working conditions better.
Primary teacher Clarice Taylor says she wants to draw attention to poor conditions.
It's about the class sizes, it's about the support, it's about the behavioural needs that we're having in the classroom at the moment, and it's making it really difficult to be able to do our jobs. We are overworked, we're underpaid, burnt out, and a lot of teachers and our friends are leaving the profession because it's just not sustainable anymore.
In Dunedin, hundreds of teachers and their supporters gathered at First Church of Otago before marching to the Octagon. Michelle Hollard has been a primary school teacher for 26 years and says conditions are untenable.
The situation that I had 2 years ago, I had 32 children in my class, and I had children in my class with high needs autism. Thank goodness for the school actually ended up having to pay out of their reserves for teacher aides to help me in the classroom, but I was also expected to bring all of those children up to a particular level by the end of the year.
Hey, ho, it's not too late! Hey, ho, it's not too late!
Former teacher Jenny Upton now works with schools on environmental education. She says teachers are busier than ever and need more support.
There's just so much that teachers are being asked to do, and there's not enough time. There's not enough time in the day for them to do that. So I really feel smaller class sizes would be such an advantage for those teachers.
Back in Wellington, Education Minister Jan Tinetti addressed the crowd.
I have stood out there right where you are now and I have protested. I have also been a teacher and a principal.
She finished to boos and chants of walk the talk.
Walk that talk! Walk that talk! Walk that talk! Walk that talk!
Afterwards, she told reporters she can't discuss the negotiations, but she is confident the unions and the ministry will reach settlements.
I'm confident because of the progress that I've been told by both sides has been made in the last wee while. I'm confident that we can get back to that table, and that's as far as I will say, because then it becomes up to the officials to do the bargaining.
Talks resume tomorrow with the Employment Relations Authority mediating a meeting between the ministry and the Post-Primary Teachers Association.
It is 16 minutes after 5. Kia amo tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A bolstered blue highway is offering a freight lifeline for 2 cyclone-hit regions with severely damaged roads. The government's announced a $3 million subsidy for the freight ship Rangitata to run an emergency coastal route between Gisborne and Hawke's Bay for the next 3 months. $250,000 of that will go towards wharf improvements in Turanganui-a-Kiwa, Gisborne. Damage to state highways means a road trip from Gisborne to Napier has gone from about 3 hours to 9 hours. Eastland Port Chief Operating Officer Andrew Gaddam joins us now. Kia ora, Andrew.
Yeah, kia ora. Good evening.
Was this your idea?
Oh, look, it's a team effort. We've got a great team up here, and we sat around after the cyclone pretty quickly and tried to figure out how we could try and open up some links to the region. So it was, I certainly won't claim it myself. It was put together by our team.
But did your port team pitch it to the Prime Minister?
Yes, we did. Yeah. It came out of Eastland Port originally. Yeah.
So tell us a bit about how it's going to work. What kind of freight can this particular ship take, and how often will she run?
Yeah, so it's obviously been a bit of a steep learning curve for us. We're predominantly a log port out of Gisborne. We do a bit of kiwi fruit and a bit of squash, but that's all bulk, no containers. So We've been on a very steep learning curve over a very short amount of time to get the container side of things set up, but with a lot of help from all the other ports around New Zealand. To be fair, we seem to be making some pretty good progress. So predominantly it is container freight that'll go in the rangatata, and in the form of meat, wool, a few apples, kiwi fruit, squash, aggregate, timber, all the various products that our region produces. So and we're predominantly going by road to Napier, both for export and domestic processing. So it has been pretty tough on our industry up here. Obviously, as you've already said, it's a long way around for us. Has been right down to Palmerston North and back up again. Some relief with State Highway 5 convoys opening, but still a hell of a long way. So getting the ship on for our regional producers is pretty exciting for everybody, really.
And so how many trips will the rangatata make in a week, for example?
Yeah, so working pretty hard on trying to get 2 trips a week in. We've currently only got one berth in operation because we're actually rebuilding a very large section of our port at the moment. So we've got to kind of make everybody fit onto that berth with logs and kiwi fruit, which we're into now as well. So we're working pretty hard to get one up to 2 trips a week to try and make it work for our customers. So each trip will take, depending on the layout, but sort of up to 34 full 40-foot containers, and then any number of different sort of combinations back from that, depending on the weight and obviously the size of the containers. So a reasonable mix. I mean, depending on how that plays out, it's sort of somewhere between, in terms of round trips, somewhere between 100 and 200 trucks a week that we'll be able to get off the road and stop that in the local industry incurring that significant cost to having to go the long way around.
Yeah, that's a fair number of trucks. And how long does it take for the ship to get from Gisborne to Napier?
Yeah, about 9 hours is what we're picking at the moment, and sort of between 6 and 12 at each end, depending on how many containers we need to put on. So we're just sort of working on those numbers at the moment. There's hasn't really been done before, so we're having to suck it and see a wee bit just to see how it all plays out. But I must say everyone's pretty excited to get some boxes moving across the port and do our bit for the region in terms of shoring up our resilience, because our State Highway 2 north to Tauranga is under a fair bit of pressure recently as well in terms of a lot of closures. So it's trying to get some resilience and some
guarantees
some
that you can get up and down.
Yeah.
Hey, this is a 3-month trial. What are you picking demand is going to be? And is there a possibility you could keep it running?
So we've had really good support from local industry so far. And when I say local industry, that's all the way down to a Wairoa course, because there's a number of industries down there that are cut off from Napier as well. So it is starting to ramp up pretty quickly for us. I must say I'm reasonably confident that we will have relatively quickly some pretty full vessels running backwards and forwards. What happens beyond the 3 months sort of period the government given us at the moment will really come down to that ongoing support of those exporters, both and the domestic guys as well, and between the other ports, Napier and wherever else this ship may end up, how everybody else sort of pitches in and makes it work really. So it's not something we can do on our own. We've sort of stood this thing up ourselves, but ultimately it's going to require everybody to make it work going forward.
Best of luck, Andrew. Really good to talk to you. That's Andrew Gaddam, who is the Eastland Port Chief Operating Officer there. Their idea to run a blue highway, a freight ship, basically, Gisborne to Hawke's Bay, and the government's kicked in about $3 million. It is 22 after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Whakaaro, keen for your feedback. Stuart Nash, more hot water for him. It turns out there's another incident of him speaking out of turn. He almost got prosecuted for it. He certainly got dressed down for it. Should he keep his remaining portfolios? The Prime Minister's standing by his man. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also interested in your thoughts on the teachers' strike and this innovative idea from Eastland Ports to run a freight a freight ship from Gisborne to Napier because of the quality of the roads. Do get in touch. It is time now, though, to go to the headlines. I think Evie is standing by. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Details have been coming to light of a second indiscretion by former Police Minister Stuart Nash, this one in 2020, during a News Talk ZB interview. Talking about the shooting of young police officer Matthew Hunt in Auckland, Mr Nash said the police had arrested the man responsible and he hoped he'd get a long sentence to reflect on what he'd done. The case against Eli Epiha hadn't in fact been completed at the time, and the Solicitor General considered prosecuting Mr Nash for contempt. Education Minister Jan Tinetti told striking teachers she's listening as she addressed a rally at Parliament today. Nationally, 50,000 teachers walked out and held rallies for better pay and conditions. National says the state of the economy is a lot worse than expected after it shrank by 0.6% in the 3 months ended December, making a recession more likely. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says it's performing well comparatively. The Auckland Council looks unlikely to get the government to pay more towards the country's largest infrastructure project, the City Rail Link, which needs an extra $1 billion. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the 50-50 split between Kiwi Rail and Auckland Transport hasn't changed. And the number of people nationwide waiting longer than 6 weeks for an MRI or CT scan rose to 39% in the last 6 months of 2022. ACT Party figures also show that in Northland, as few as 24% of patients are getting a scan within that time. The government says it's committed to cutting waiting lists. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic news, there's nothing new currently to report on any of the main routes around the country, although Waka Kotahi wants to draw your attention to the incoming heavy rain and strong winds that may affect parts of the central North Island, Wellington and swathes of the South Island. Please remember to drive to the conditions. We'll have more news headlines and any traffic news for you at 20 to 6.
Thank you, Evie. For many of New Zealand's top track and field athletes, today marks the start of the last meet of the summer. After several years without international competitors, the start list for this week's Sir Graham Douglas International in Waitakere is stacked with quality athletes, many of them looking ahead to the World Championships. And we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Felicity, who should be watching out for at this meet?
Well, New Zealand sprinter Zoe Hobbs, the fastest woman in New Zealand history. She's run the 100 metres twice in under 11 seconds in the last 2 weeks. So she's somebody definitely that'll be one of the star attractions. She told me this week, though, that she's on at 8:20 tonight. So it's going to be a little bit colder than what she's normally used to, and for those previous 2 meets that she's been running in. So she doesn't expect that she's actually going to get a third personal best tonight. But she's definitely still be somebody that you should be watching out for. She's going to be quite rapid. And she is also anchoring the New Zealand women's 4x100 metre relay team as well. So they're going up against an Australian team. So there's always that Trans-Tasman rivalry there as well, which will be something for the running fans to look out for. Once we head to the field events, it'll be the shot putters, Tom Walsh and Jacko Gill. There's that long-standing rivalry between these two, although they don't actually get to face off that often. And actually, Gill, over the 2 weeks ago, just at the Nationals, he won his first national title. And so that broke Walsh's 13-year hold on that title. So Walsh wasn't actually going to compete tonight at this meet, but that defeat has actually spurred him on. He wants to get another crack at Jacko, so he'll actually be out there tonight again throwing the shot. And to get the national title, Jacko threw at 21.80 metres, which was his second best ever throw. So for him as well, this will be something for those two. They're always within a little bit of each other, so they'll be pushing each other tonight. And the also para shot putter Lisa Adams, she's coached by her sister Dan Valerie, and she could get close to her world record distance of 15.50 metres. She's been improving during the early part of the season, so tonight that's a world record to watch out for. And the trio of pole vaulters, these three girls are also quite close to each other. Liza McCartney, Olivia McTaggart and Imogen Arris. Eliza is 10 centimetres short of the World Championships qualifying record. So she is going to be pushing very hard because she wants to get that locked in before the end of the summer. And as we've said, this is one of the last meets that she'll be able to do that. But Olivia actually managed to lock that in and get us with a 6 centimetre personal best last week. So that standard of 4.71, she's already locked that one away, but it'll be the other two that'll be chasing that tonight.
Wow, lots to watch for. OK, women's footballers are calling on FIFA to up the prize money for the Football World Cup, which kicks off in New Zealand in July. What is it and what do they want it to be?
Well, so there was a letter that was sent to FIFA from 150 players from 25 different national teams. This was uncovered by the Wall Street Journal, and they said within that they wanted to get equal prize money to the men's competition. So over the last couple of years, the women's money has increased, but it's nowhere near what the men get for their World Cup. So last year, the World Cup men's team, they got a prize pool of $713 million, which is actually, again, for them an increase. But for the women, this hasn't been locked in for the World Cup here yet, which is why that letter went out. They kind of wanted to influence FIFA in this lead up to what FIFA will announce will be available to the women's teams. There are 32 teams this year, so it's an expanded competition. But they're only going to be getting $112 million. So that's quite a difference from that $713 million.
I suppose they'd argue about audience numbers and things, so that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Probably a little bit hard to argue that in the football when the 2019 Women's World Cup had such a large audience.
Yeah, let's see what happens. Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with sport. Interested in your thoughts on that. So the women have the same prize pool, 2101 on text. Let us know. Former Police Minister Stuart Nash is in the firing line again following revelations this is not the first time he's spoken out of turn. He admits he stuffed up in the era of judgment that led to him losing his job, calling the police commissioner, making suggestions about an appeal and criticising the judiciary. The Prime Minister is standing by his man for now, even in the face of new allegations that he made inappropriate comments about a man accused of murdering a police officer. The opposition is furious and is questioning why the police commissioner didn't raise the phone call he had with Mr Nash at the time. Here's political reporter Giles Dexter.
After yesterday's embarrassing fall from grace, Stuart Nash cut a chipper figure getting off a flight to Gisborne this morning.
Absolutely, I completely stuffed up, and you know what, if I was the Prime Minister I would have done exactly the same thing as Owen did.
He was so desperate to appear tough on crime, he shot himself in the foot, criticising a judicial decision and admitting he'd asked the police commissioner whether he would appeal it. It was a cabinet manual no-no, and before he could be sacked, he resigned. But Nash has no plans to resign from his other portfolios.
No, I've got a hell of a lot of work to do. I'm very, very engaged with what I need to get it done in the Bay, and I'm loving forestry, economic development and fisheries.
That decision won't be his to make, but the Prime Minister's, who last night was making jokes at Nash's expense at a function at Parliament.
This is the first event that I have attended in this capacity as Prime Minister in this room. So a few other firsts today, but one of them shall not be mentioned.
Somewhat awkwardly, the Prime Minister and Nash were together for a cyclone recovery announcement in Tairāwhiti. And Chris Hipkins, standing in front of his beleaguered minister, is backing him to keep his head down and get on with his other jobs.
He's owned his mistake, he's apologised for it, he's paid a price for that, and the fact that he's no longer the Minister of Police. I have confidence in him fulfilling the other roles that he's got. I'm confident that he won't repeat the mistake. So now we've got work to do. So it's time to move on and do that.
Opposition parties don't want to move on, though, and are shifting their attentions to the Prime Minister's judgment. National's Nicola Willis asks if Nash breached the Cabinet manual, then why isn't he out of Cabinet entirely?
These are very low standards that our new Prime Minister is putting in place, that a minister can breach the Cabinet manual, double down on it and retain their ministerial warrants. It's unacceptable.
Hipkins and Nash both believe losing his beloved police portfolio, which Nash only got back in January off Hipkins, is punishment enough.
Everyone knows I love that police portfolio. The Prime Minister has stripped that portfolio from me.
The Prime Minister is now tasked with finding someone to take the role, but nobody seems to want it.
No, I don't think that there's any grounds to say no to any offer. If the PM offered me whatever, I'd say yes, but I just don't want it.
I will serve at the Prime Minister's pleasure whatever portfolio he wants me to do.
Do I want the police portfolio? I've got quite a lot to be getting on with. I'm all right.
Last night, the police commissioner said he thought Nash was just venting frustration and asking a rhetorical question. He didn't act on it. But the ACT party wants to know if Andrew Costa raised the phone call with the then Police Minister or then Prime Minister back in 2021 under the No Surprises Convention.
There's been a major failure either by the Police Commissioner to pass on information that a very important law was being broken, or you've got a failure by the ministers who were told to actually take action at the time.
RNZ asked police at 12:30 this afternoon whether the Commissioner alerted ministers to the phone call with Nash. We're yet to get a response.
Giles Dexter reporting there. It is 28 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona, the economy contracted at the end of last year. What is the reason?
Well, it contracted on two sides, the manufacturing and on the services side. And, when you think about goods and services, those are the only two things that we really produce. And on the services side, which accounts for about 2/3 of the economy, we fell, 0.1%. That's a contraction. And for the manufacturing side, we fell 1.9%. Together, overall, the numbers show that we dropped 0.6%. And so that's a contraction that was not forecast. The Reserve Bank was expecting on the quarter growth of 1.4%, while the market was thinking 0.2%. Both of those were wrong. And as a result of that, there's a lot of uncertainty now about what's going to happen with interest rates. Some people are saying we should be holding back on interest rate hikes, maybe 1/4 percentage point next time. Some are saying, look, we still need to hold the course, and 0.5 percentage point is still on the cards. Remains to be seen, but it's not good news, and it certainly affected the New Zealand dollar today.
Okay, do you want to give me the dollar now, then?
Why don't I? Yes. Well, the Kiwi fell about 0.5%. So we're trading at the moment at 61.6 US cents, 92.9 Australian, and 50.95 British pence, so just under 51. And that's not where we started the day. So definitely there was a hit to our dollar on that score.
Okay. Now, Fonterra, on the other hand, has delivered a strong first half result. What numbers
really
did they
strong.
have?
Yeah, so their first half profit rose 50%. That was to $546 million. They also doubled their interim dividend from 5 cents a share to 10 cents a share, which is a positive one. And they're going to give $800 million to shareholders. Well, that's the plan, depending on when and how their sale of Sapori in the Chile goes. And so that's was very positive news. The market responded really very strongly to that. The share price rose 8.5% today. And so I would tell you right now how the rest of the market finished, but I wanted to say the star of the day was, guess what? PushPay. Of course it was. The mobile donations company. We love talking about PushPay. Well, they got a new takeover offer. Yep. And as a result of that share price rose 13% today. There you go. So I could give you some more details, but we'll have lots of other chances.
Yeah, and what were the overall numbers for where the market finished?
We rose 0.7%, helped along by those two particularly good results. One good result and another takeover offer. That was a gain of 82 points to 11,699.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with business news. After 2 failed attempts, the Prime Minister has finally visited Wairoa more than a month after the town was hit by Cyclone Gabrielle. Those who have lost their homes and have been staying at the marae say they're relieved he's finally made it and glad they haven't been forgotten about. But they want more reassurance and support for the clean-up efforts and into long-term accommodation. Ashley McCall was there.
The help is here, but it's coming, but she come a lot faster and a lot more. We won't say no, because as you know, we're never going to get back to Napier for quite even a couple of years now.
This is some of the kōrero the Prime Minister heard while having lunch with Wairoa's community. Whānau finally getting a chance to voice their concerns and state what they've lost from Cyclone Gabrielle. Some are still living in cars whilst others have been staying here at Taihua Marae, but unsure for how much longer. Nevertheless, the community is glad Chris Hipkins has finally made it to town.
Relieving. If you're not here on the ground with us, we believe that we're here all by ourselves.
Very good that he came to, have a look and check on us, and it was good to see him.
Well, it's good that he's here,
He acknowledged us.
Yeah, to acknowledge us, and if he answers us any questions, we can answer them.
Trevor Mihare's home was one of many that was yellow stickered in the area. That includes a marae at his home, both of which were completely destroyed by silt. He wants reassurance from the government that they'll help improve the town's infrastructure to help protect it from future natural disasters.
This is twice now. It's the third time we believe it'll go right over our houses. So if they're all we got to do now, if we're doing our houses up now, we're just building quick fixes. because we know it's going to come again. So that quick fix is only until the next one. And we don't know whether it's going to come this winter, next winter, or it could come tomorrow.
Kuiawai West Scott's home is also yellow stickered, and she's been staying at the marae since the cyclone hit because her home is still filled with mud. She wants the government to do more for those who have lost everything.
Support the families that have lost a lot, in their homes, and to help them repair their homes again, because there was a lot of flooding and people had to move out and go and stay with other families. And so it'd be good to just have the government bring the workers in to help us clean up.
Stan Paul, whose home was red stickered, agrees.
I just think that we should get accommodation in that.
Well, to see them through, whether it's on a short term or long term.
Earlier in the day, the Prime Minister announced an emergency shipping route between Gisborne and Napier. It currently takes more than 9 hours to transport products between the two cities after key roads were damaged. More than $2 million will be spent on chartering a ship for 3 months to help get products, including vegetables and meat, out of Gisborne into the market. Chris Hipkins says reopening the critical economic link between Napier and Gisborne is going to take some time.
And in the meantime, we still need to be able to get goods to market, and we still need to be able to make sure that there's relatively free movement along the coast. And coastal shipping, the Blue Highway, can actually fill a significant part of that gap that we've got at the moment.
The iwi Trust in the flood-ravaged town of Wairoa will underwrite $2.5 million to help fix flood-damaged homes. More than 300 homes in the predominantly Māori town were ruined in Cyclone Gabrielle.
Ashley McCall reporting there. Let's get to some of your feedback, a lot of it coming in on Stuart Nash. Revelations that he got a rap across the knuckles for other comments he's made in relation to a man who at the time had been charged with the killing of a police officer, later found guilty, but at the time he made the comments, the man had just been charged. This in from Susie in Whanganui. I think the ex-police minister is just as frustrated as the rest of us out there who are sick of hearing or reading of the lax penalties for those in our society who break the law. Our laws have been turned upside down, where the ones who break the law have more rights than those who obey the law. Another says, so Stuart said the man who shot a policeman should get a tough sentence. Who wouldn't agree with him? What is common sense? What is common sense going in this country? Where is common sense going in this country? I suppose the issue is at the time the man hadn't been convicted, he'd been charged, and there is the whole issue of separation of ministers from the judiciary. What's the saying? Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. Another person says, Stuart Nash, what goes around comes around, kick him out with the contempt he's accrued. Another says Nash must go. And this one from a listener who says, Stuart Nash, if he has displayed such a lack of judgment in such an important ethical area, he can't be trusted with any portfolio, surely. So do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text. It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we love your feedback, so do keep it coming. You've got lots of opinions on Stuart Nash and whether he should keep his remaining portfolios. If you want to join the conversation, 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also interested in your thoughts on the teachers' strike, what you think is a fair pay increase for them, 2101 on text. Time though to go to the headlines. Anaya Iwi, mena pita pita kōrero.
Embattled Cabinet Minister Stuart Nash is back in hot water after revelations of a second serious indiscretion. A radio interview on News Talk ZB in June 2020 has come to light, in which Mr Nash discusses the death of Police Constable Matthew Hunt and says he hopes the man arrested gets a long prison sentence. The case against Eli Epiha had not in fact been completed at the time, and the Solicitor General considered prosecuting Mr Nash for contempt. The Education Minister, Jan Tinetti, says she's confident the government is getting closer to a resolution with striking teachers. 50,000 teachers held rallies around the country today. A freight ship that's running an emergency coastal route between Gisborne and Hawke's Bay will take up to 200 trucks off the road each week. The government's announced a $3 million subsidy for the Rangitata freight ship to cover the route for the next 3 months. Auckland's mayor has come under fire for saying libraries across the supercity could be run only by volunteers. Wayne Brown described libraries and other social services as nice-to-haves as he eyes up budget savings. The Public Service Association's Bronwyn Maxwell says the comments are a slap in the face. And two of the country's largest cities have lost up to a third of their green space since 1980. An Environment Commissioner report says green space per person fell by at least 30% in Auckland and by more than 20% in Hamilton, mostly to backyard development. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, everything seems to be at the usual pace at this time on the main centres and routes around the country. Please be aware if you've got bad weather coming to you to drive to the conditions. We'll have more news and weather at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. The jets are cooling, with the economy shrinking by more than 0.5% in the December quarter. The 0.6% drop is double what some economists were predicting and was driven by falls in manufacturing, export and retail sectors. One up was the construction sector, with growth of 1.6%. But today's economic report card predates the devastating floods, Cyclone Gabrielle, and now the international banking speed wobbles. Well, joining us now is ANZ senior economist Miles Workman. Kia ora, Miles. What are we to make of this?
Well, I think these data today do have a little bit of something for everyone. There's definitely some noise in the data. If you cast your mind back to Q3, we did see the economy grow 1.7% quarter on quarter. Look, in historical context, that's a massive quarterly pace of growth. So, when you look at the Q4 data and things contracted 0.6%, well, naturally, there's just a little bit of payback from that very strong Q3 read. So that's what I mean by noise. There is a bit of softening demand under the hood, though. You're certainly seeing that for some industries, retail spending down. Certainly some evidence here that households are tightening their belts and businesses are starting to pull back perhaps a little bit on investment. But at the same time, there's also biting capacity constraints for some industries. If you think about tourism, we did have a strong influx of tourist arrivals in the December quarter, but many hospitality businesses just weren't able to meet that demand because they couldn't find enough labour. So they didn't open the door as much as they perhaps wanted to. Those types of capacity constraints, they're inflationary because they reflect a tight labour market, but they're also bad for economic activity, which is part of the story in the Q4 numbers.
So, Miles, two successive quarters of negative growth equals a recession, which you will be acutely aware of. But is it inevitable that is going to happen? Because we're going to have infrastructure and rebuild, and surely that's going to fight against the recession, isn't it?
Well, yeah, all else equal, of course. You've got a whole lot of extra demand that's going to come on stream because of this damaged goods, essentially, or property, meaning demand for goods and services will be higher than otherwise. Is it going to move the dial in terms of the overall economic cycle? No, I don't think that's the answer, simply because interest rates are rising. They're a very potent driver of economic cycles. So I don't think the cyclone and the extra activity that's going to come along with that is going to change the broad story. You can probably think of these cyclone impacts as more of a cycle extender rather than a cycle changer.
Okay, so the Reserve Bank was anticipating recession more to the middle of the year. Does this mean it's coming early and will finish early, or is it coming early and staying longer?
Well, I think when the Reserve Bank look at these data, they're going to make a similar assessment to us in the sense that there's noise in the data. There is some pockets of softening demand, but there's also biting capacity constraints. In terms of the Reserve Bank's forecast for a recession over the latter half of the year, I don't think this really changes that broad story very much. When we think about these more medium-term forecasts, what we're really doing is we're telling a story about the state of underlying economic momentum. And that's, if you think forward to the end of this year, well, that's when the Reserve Bank's actually forecasting a relatively sharp lift in the unemployment rate versus the unemployment rate currently, which is near a record low. So, there is sort of two kind of distinct phases of how we interpret the data, so to speak. At the starting point, where we are now, it's noisy. There is this potential here that we get another downward surprise in Q1, and therefore we tick the technical recession box. But I wouldn't call that a real recession. The real recession that's on the cards is probably something that's not going to really be evident in the labour market until the latter half of the year and into 2024.
Miles, we're almost out of time, but what people will really want to know is what you think is going to happen with interest rates.
Look, we think that the data today don't really change things too much for the Reserve Bank, so we're still expecting 2 more hikes to be delivered, 25 basis points in both April and May. That would take the OCR to 5.25.
Thank you, Miles. Really appreciate your time. That's Miles Workman, who's a senior economist with ANZ. Auckland Council's budget blowout has councillors in crisis mode. Significant job cuts are likely across the council and its organisations as it looks to cover more than $1 billion in expenses. Felix Walton has more.
An extra $1 billion for the City Rail link was the elephant in the room at today's council meeting. But before it could get that far, the Mayor was ruminating over how it could be covered. It's a cost which, in theory, would be shared 50-50 by the council and the government. In theory.
I'll be going to the government and saying, listen here, mate, we didn't actually have 50% of the decision-making.
Wayne Brown on Morning Report saying he will be playing hardball with the government over who pays what. He wants the government to increase its share. But Finance Minister Grant Robertson put that idea to bed.
It's a partnership, and it remains a partnership between the Crown and Auckland Council. We have been carefully looking at where the costs are and making sure that we've provisioned for it. I would expect the Council to do the same. From our perspective, nothing's changed. It's a 50-50 partnership.
Minister for Auckland, Michael Wood, agreed.
Well, the 50-50 comment is right. That is fundamentally the agreement that has been in place since 2014 when Auckland Council and the Crown entered into the CRL project together. That it's 50-50 in terms of governance and in terms of cost share, so that is simply a statement of fact. In theory, anything can be changed, but that's the agreement that we have at this point.
With that extra cost bearing down on the council's already battered books, Mayor Brown today challenged the Auckland Light Rail team on whether they would encounter similar problems.
Yesterday we've got $500 million problem as a result of the CRL. How do we know that you're not going to be doing this sort of stuff?
Waitakere councillor Shane Henderson says the money doesn't have to come from budget cuts.
Well, it's not necessarily cutting. We could cover some of this shortfall in funding through our debt that we have some headroom on, which is pretty good news for Aucklanders.
He says the council could trim the fat without directly impacting the public.
In terms of savings, I think, things like group shared services, some of the back office staff that don't necessarily impact communities on the ground. We've done a lot of work in that area through many budgets and many years, but I think there's still savings we can make in terms of CCOs and Auckland Council.
Manukau councillor Al Filipina isn't willing to call it a blowout just yet. He wants to give CRL a chance to justify the request.
We need to know, partly I know it's COVID-19, but there's also other information that we need to get back to us. So we need to wait for that information for us to have an informed decision.
Flood damage is another problem entirely, but Mr Filipina is confident that the government will step up to help.
Where do we get the money to fix the infrastructure? Where the hell do we, well not hell, sorry, but where do we get that from? I have no doubt at all that with the flooding and with the cyclone that the government will come on board.
Auckland's flood damage is estimated to cost another $1 billion, squeezing the council's budget even further. The Mayor says job cuts will be needed to save money.
Every person should be concerned. If you're working in organisations losing money, you would be aware that there are job risks.
He's floated costs to social services could be sliced off the council's plate and put on the government's, as the self-described Mr Fix-It tries to patch up a very big budget shortfall.
It is 9 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Well, after 2 failed attempts, the Prime Minister has finally visited Wairoa more than a month after the town was hit by Cyclone Gabrielle. Wairoa Mayor Craig Little joins us now. Kia ora, Craig. Has the Prime Minister promised anything for Wairoa?
Kia ora. Nothing, sort of this way, my pockets aren't heavy at this stage, but we've told him what we need, and we've really, he's gone away understanding what this community needs.
What were your top asks?
Well, number one, we're going to really struggle to get some of these houses up and running, and our local iwi Tato have underwritten 2.5 million, and so to get straight into these houses, start stripping them out, getting them ready to put everything back into them. So that's a lot of money, and they said, well, we can't afford that. Tato did, and we need it. You guys to come up. So basically, we've just explained, get these people to the houses, but of course we need a lot of other stuff too. We've got things broken everywhere, and roading, we just need a bit of urgency on the roading. It just seems just taking too long to do anything.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So when you told him, let's stick with roads for a minute, when you told him it was taking too long to fix the roads, what did he say to you? Well,
it's hard to sort of work out. I'm not a guy that goes too hard on ministers on their first meeting. I get to know them first, and and we've had a pretty good day. I took it from that he totally understood what we wanted, because honestly, we're pumping water out of one job, and I'm just thinking, why are we pumping water for 4 weeks when we could have fixed that culvert in the first week? And things like that, and getting to Napier, I said, it's just could be outright urgency. Instead of working 8 hours a day, how about work through the clock, right round the clock? So he's got it loud and clear from all of us, and we just need to get this community back to a functioning community where if we need to go down to Hawke's Bay, we can.
Okay, so on the road situation, you can't get south to Napier on State Highway 2. The Napier-Taupo road has still got heavy restrictions on it. You got State Highway 38 to Rotorua. You have described that as a goat track in the past.
Yeah, it's still not open.
Yeah, and a big chunk of it's unsealed. What do you think is your best bet here? Do you want the government to improve State Highway 38, seal it the whole way? Is that your backstop?
Backstop is improve it, and we'll work together with the iwi and everybody around the table how we're going to improve it at this stage. And there's 3 one-lane sections. Whakatane have said that they will do it for us because it's a road that we're 100% funded by NZTA. So come on, let's just get it done. There's no excuses why it can't be done.
In terms of housing, which you have identified as something that is a big issue, and we know that there are people still living in their cars, you want more money for iwi providers to clean up houses, but there's been talk of modular houses. Given the state of your roads, can they actually get into Wairoa?
Well, there's a big bridge, railway bridge, what they call Bartlett's, about halfway to Gisborne, just over half. We want that removed because the railway, obviously, no trains coming for a few years yet. Get that removed so we can get the houses down from Gisborne or further afield, because that needs to be done before we even start talking about bringing houses in. I've asked that we, let's not just work on a go slow how to get houses here. Let's do this under urgency. We've got, sections there that people were going to build on. They're available now. They've got everything pumped, water, power, you name it. Let's just buy these sections off these people and get some houses on them. Even if we put 3 houses per section and take away 2 down the track and leave one there, and it becomes a normal house.
Okay, so how many sections are available, Craig? How many?
I think, just look offhand, we've got a couple of big developments. We've got probably about 60 or 70 houses planning to get built, so that's all underway. Help us fast track that. Give us some money that we can just get everybody there and build these houses. And that's going to relieve our, because we were down. We needed 150 houses before the storm event. Now we probably need another 100 or more.
So how much do you need to get your housing situation sorted? How much from central government?
Oh, gosh, I would say 10 to 20 million just to get us started, really.
And in terms of the suggestion that they bring modular houses in, to be clear, you're telling me that there's no roadway that would allow it at the moment. The best place is to bring it from Gisborne, and you have to knock down a railway bridge because why? The load on the truck would be too high.
Yeah, that's right. And so these are homes, transportable homes. You wouldn't be able to get under that bridge. So modular homes, I think, are the ones you stand up. So they'd be fine. But it's pretty quick if you can get a house that's already made, bring it in and bang, put it on a section, away you go.
So did you tell the Prime Minister you need a wrecking ball through that rail bridge?
We've been under the bridge with him. He's well and truly seen it. He was very responsive. Look, he didn't say no to anything. And, we had Minister Kiri Tapu Allen with him, Minister Stuart Nash, as well as Minister Meka Whaitiri. So we had all the right people there. They've seen what we need. They get it. And, they won't let him forget. I know that.
Really appreciate your time, Craig. Thanks for joining us. That's Wairoa Mayor Craig Little there. And we've got an update now on a story we brought you last week, a story about the Coromandel, about Leilani, who was pregnant. She was overdue to have her baby and she was really worried about how she was going to get to the hospital in time because, as you'll probably remember, a number of the local roads there are severely damaged in the cyclone. Well, Leilani has been in touch to say she and partner Jade are the proud parents of a healthy little boy born on Sunday. So congratulations to her and her partner. And she says her chat with us helped. She says they were offered accommodation in Thames after the Waikato DHB heard her talking to Checkpoint. So to Leilani and Jade, congratulations, and we look forward to hearing your new boy's name. Now, let's get to some more of your feedback now on the subject of teachers. Sue says, I heard teachers saying today on media, I have children in my class with ADHD or autism, implying they are lots of extra work. How these kids and families will feel hearing this, I can't imagine, she says. Not good. Another says, I get the teachers' issues, I really do, but really we are all being overworked and overwhelmed as a result of the lack of suitable available labour and increasingly complex economic conditions and societal issues. All I ask is if teachers get paid better, then what they produce out of their classrooms in terms of quality young people increases with that. Yes, earn more money, but produce better outcomes, not just the same less than average talent coming out of most of their classrooms currently. Another says, do teachers think their financial situation is any different from any other New Zealander at the moment? They have no idea what the reality is for the average working Kiwi at the moment. And when did they become such a group of whining wimps? That from Cleo. On the subject of a blue highway, this is the freight ship that's going to run between Gisborne and Napier because the roads are, severely damaged. Coastal shipping should solve the problem of South Island wheat, which at present can't be shifted to the north. Let's go back to the pass, says Brian of Ngāmotu. Thanks for getting in touch, Brian. Coastal shipping for Gisborne at last. Someone had some sense. Why did Gisborne people have to come up with this idea? Why didn't the government do it? Also, why isn't this still part of moving goods around New Zealand, says Claire. Well, it's a 3-month trial with this subsidy and then they'll see what demand there is and where to go from there. And Paul says freight ships instead of road, up there with rail? Yes, please, says Paul, followed by multiple exclamation marks.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A second serious indiscretion by embattled Cabinet Minister Stuart Nash has come to light. Mr Nash resigned as Police Minister yesterday after boasting in a radio interview about calling the Police Commissioner over a case where he thought the sentence was too light. In another News Talk ZB interview in 2020, Mr Nash talked about the shooting of police officer Matthew Hunt and said he hoped the man arrested would get a long sentence. The case against Eli Epiha hadn't in fact been completed at the time, and the Solicitor General considered prosecuting Mr Nash for contempt. Instead, the Attorney General was asked to reprimand him. National MP Mark Mitchell says there's now no way Mr Nash can retain his other portfolios and remain a Cabinet Minister.
To me now it's untenable that Stuart Nash can remain as a... he should have actually been stood down as a Cabinet Minister anyway the first time, but now that this has come to light, it's just going to open up a whole lot more questions.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says the Attorney-General told Stuart Nash his comments were unacceptable, which resolved the matter. Mr Hipkins says that's now in the past and Mr Nash is on notice for any future serious errors of judgment. Thousands of school and kindergarten teachers held their first ever joint strike today. The action by the Educational Institute and Post-Primary Teachers Association completely closed nearly 1,000 schools. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, reports.
Primary, area and secondary teachers, kindergarten teachers and primary and area school principals are all negotiating separately, but they're considering broadly the same offer. A pay rise of $6,000 or $7,000 over 2 years, plus more classroom release time for primary teachers. Today, union members said they want more, especially around working conditions. An unknown number of schools opened only to provide supervision for children who could not be left at home.
A freight ship intended to ply between Gisborne and Hawke's Bay is expected to take up to 200 trucks off the road each week. The government's announced a $3 million subsidy so that Rangitata can cover the route for the next 3 months. Eastland Port's Chief Operating Officer, Andrew Gaddam, says cyclone damage to state highways is adding 6 hours to the usual 3-hour road trip between Gisborne and Napier. He told Checkpoint, however, that the port currently has just one operating berth.
We've got to kind of make everybody fit onto that berth with logs and kiwi fruit, which we're into now as well. So we're working pretty hard to get up to 2 trips a week to try and make it work for our customers. So each trip will take, depending on the layout, but sort of up to 34 full 40-foot containers.
A colorectal surgeon at Christchurch Hospital says the critical shortage of anaesthetic technicians, which has forced the cancellation of 1 in 4 planned operations, could have been avoided. Nearly 30 technicians have quit the service in the past year. Frank Frizzell says workforce problems have been building for years, but switching technicians from on-the-job training to a 3-year degree cut the available number.
We knew the training was happening. We knew that the workforce was short. No one did anything. So, this is a predictable problem that there's been a piss-poor response from senior leadership.
Frank Frizzell says the health system can't afford to wait 3 years for a new crop of graduates. The Health Minister says it's unacceptable that the number of people nationally waiting for an MRI or CT scan increased last year. Figures released to the ACT Party show the percentage of patients waiting longer than 6 weeks for a scan rose from 36.6% to 39% in the last 6 months of 2022. On behalf of Minister Aisha Verrill, Associate Health Minister Barbara Edmonds told the House this afternoon there is no silver bullet to address wait times.
I made my expectations very clear to Te Whatu Ora that improving wait times for care is one of my top priorities. These pressures are being addressed by focusing on how hospitals manage the movement of patients through hospitals by prioritising those who need more urgent care and increasing regional coordination to deliver health services.
The British Finance Minister has laid out tax measures aimed at encouraging companies to invest. Forecasts show the country narrowly avoiding a recession this year. The BBC's Rob Watson has more.
There is good news and bad news on the British economy. The good news is that inflation is forecast to fall sharply this year and the country to avoid recession. The bad news is that Britain continues to face sluggish growth and a difficult squeeze on public spending over the next 5 years. As before, the OBR attributes some of the blame to Brexit and the stagnation in investment since the referendum. To boost growth, the government is offering tax incentives to businesses and has announced a series of measures aimed at tempting some of the more than 7 million working-age people in Britain not actually in work back into a job.
And Powerco is working to resolve a fault that's been causing streetlights to fail in large parts of New Plymouth, Inglewood and Bell Block for some weeks. The lines company says a faulty piece of equipment at the Brooklyn substation is causing lights not to turn on in the evening or off during the day. Staff have had to turn the lights on and off manually. Powerco says the problem will be resolved when new parts are installed in the next few days. It thanks customers for their patience. That's the news.
It's a year since the violent end of the illegal occupation at Parliament. If you thought you had seen it all at the time, you should think again. Boiling Point, a new documentary from RNZ, includes previously unseen footage of clashes with police. It's the first feature broadcast to provide a straightforward account of the final day of one of Aotearoa's most infamous protests. Watch the documentary now at rnz.co.nz/boiling point.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Several severe weather warnings and watches are active. Severe northwest gales are possible about central and southern areas of the country. Whanganui, Manawatu and from Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine today. High cloud with a few spots of rain tomorrow. For the remainder of the Ika Maui, the North Island, cloud increasing today and isolated showers developing. Occasional rain tomorrow, sometimes heavy. Looking at Te Waipounamu, the South Island, Nelson and Marlborough. Becoming cloudy with a few showers today, rain with heavy falls overnight, then fine for a time tomorrow morning and afternoon. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, also the headwaters of Canterbury and Otago. Rain at times with heavy falls from this afternoon. Squally thunderstorms possible from tonight. For the remainder of Canterbury and Otago, also for Southland, high cloud with rain spreading east at times, possibly heavy in the south overnight. Thunderstorms possible in North Otago and Canterbury from tomorrow afternoon. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, rain late tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thank you, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Former Police Minister Stuart Nash is copping more flack tonight amid revelations the Solicitor General considered prosecuting him for contempt back in 2020. Mr Nash's second indiscretion was during another News Talk ZB interview when he said he hoped the man arrested for the fatal shooting of Constable Matthew Hunt would get a long prison sentence. At the time, Eli Epihar's case was ongoing. Ultimately, Stuart Nash got a telling off from fellow Minister and Attorney General David Parker. This, of course, comes just a day after Mr Nash admitted in a radio interview that he'd called his friend, the Police Commissioner, to discuss a home detention sentence given to a Southland farmer for illegal firearms. Stuart Nash told Andrew Costa he hoped the police would appeal that sentence. Yesterday's admission saw Mr Nash stripped of his police portfolio, but he remains the Minister for Economic Development, Forestry and Fisheries. And that doesn't sit well with ACT Party leader David Seymour, and he joins us now. Kia ora, David. A lot to digest there, but what do you think should happen now?
Well, kia ora tātou. Look, I think the argument the Prime Minister's made is two things. One, I've investigated if there's been any other incidents like this, and there haven't been. That's clearly not true unless you can somehow argue that the previous incident wasn't like this one. I don't think any reasonable person would think that they're any different. They both involve mouthing off as a minister, trying to influence judicial decisions. That is really, really wrong. The second point that the Prime Minister's tried to make is that, well, you know, he's been punished and therefore that's enough. Well, I think the other way you can look at it, that's very much a student union politics way. He's, you know, paid his dues and down he goes and now he's back up. I think the more business-oriented way is to ask, is this person actually fit for purpose for the role they're in? And I don't think someone that is sort of, it's hard to tell if he's naive about how important these constitutional conventions actually are, or just thinks that, you know, it's all a bit of a laugh and everyone should just suck it up and get over it. Whichever is the case, I don't think a person like that should be a minister for the Crown, Fisheries, Forestry, Economic Development. They involve big and often contentious decisions that can advantage or disadvantage one party or the other. And as the Cabinet Manual says, someone who's a minister should have the highest standards of conduct at any time.
There are a couple of things that are unclear at the moment, which would, well, allow people to make more definitive judgments on the situation. Is there any proof that the Prime Minister knew that Stuart Nash had been reprimanded for this earlier incident?
No, there's no proof of that, but he is on the record, having been asked by a journalist yesterday, have you sought assurance and satisfied yourself that there weren't any other incidents like this? So, you know, he gave an absolute guarantee that he was confident that hadn't happened. As it turns out, either his assurance seeking wasn't very effective, or perhaps he did have some inkling. Either way, you know, the Prime Minister...
Or someone has misled him. That is a possibility too.
You're right. You're very right, logically. But if that's the case, then the Prime Minister's now got a large burden of proof to show who that was and how that could happen. Because what we're dealing with here is stuff that goes beyond politics or this election or who likes who the most. It's some really fundamental protections that New Zealanders have that, you can't be guilty until you've been proven that before a jury of your peers without political interference. So this stuff does really matter.
Okay, on that point, because we're getting a lot of texts in on this, right? And a lot of people are saying, well, he's just saying what everybody else thinks and he doesn't have really any influence on the judiciary, so he's mouthing off. Why should he be punished in this way? And I suppose the other argument is, David, you would have said in your time, oh, that person deserves a harsher sentence than that, or I hope that person does get a harsh sentence.
I'm not sure that I have, and certainly I wouldn't have done it as a minister. I think I got some sympathy for people who say, well, look, there's too much crime, the penalties aren't strong enough, and there should be tougher sentences. But there is a way to do that is consistent with the rule of law, and that is for Parliament to openly debate what the law should be, write it down in a statute, publish it, and make it apply to everybody equally, not have ministers making phone calls in the night saying this case or that case should be handled differently. So this is the difference between being tough on crime and actually observing the rule of law. Ironically, 3 strikes was one such statute designed to make sure that judges did give out tougher sentences to recidivist, violent and sexual offenders. The Labour Party recently removed that law and seems to favour, at least in the case of Stuart Nash, a kind of case-by-case unofficial basis. Another example, I think that the Sentencing Act should be changed so that people who loot during a state of emergency actually face that as an aggravating factor in sentencing and go away longer, because it's got to be one of the worst things you can do is loot when people have already lost everything they've got. But again, we would propose to do that consistent with the rule of law, debate it in Parliament, publish it, pass it, so that you can read it, Lisa, I can read it, and everybody knows their rights, not this phone call in the night stuff.
That's in terms of changing legislation. Let's talk a bit more about political management, right? 2 things here. David Parker is a senior minister, Attorney General. He is the one that apparently gives Stuart Nash a telling off at the time, right? And he remains in government and remains a senior minister. And also the issue of the Prime Minister. Given, well, we know David Parker knew this information, what does that say about potentially his handling of the situation? And what if the Prime Minister did know about this earlier misstep?
Well, the Prime Minister has been amazingly brazen in attempting to effectively campaign against his own government and persuade people that he's totally different from the leadership of the last 5 years. I think one of the criticisms that you could make of Jacinda Ardern is that for whatever strengths she may have had, she was hopeless at holding ministers accountable. There was the case of Meka Whaitiri, there was the case of David Clark, who went mountain biking in a pandemic while he was the Minister of Health, making the rule saying you couldn't do that. They all got off softly. Now, if Chris Hipkins is really different, then he needs to show that demoting Stuart Nash from one portfolio was not just a performative thing that he did as political signalling, that he genuinely is different, that he genuinely did seek reassurances there was nothing else like this, that he can trust the ministers and he will act decisively. Otherwise, this whole charade that somehow government has changed rings hollow around some of the most critical issues the government deals with.
Appreciate your time, David. That is David Seymour, who is the ACT party leader there. We are getting a lot of feedback on this one. Let's get to some of it. This person says Stuart Nash's problem seems to be that things that should go without saying don't. Another says Nash should stay, but he's got many ears and eyes listening and watching him now, so there's absolutely no room for any more stuff-ups. And this person says Stu Nash speaks for real Kiwis, keep him on. I think the point David Seymour was making there is that, yes, maybe he is saying the things that everyday Kiwis are, but he is a minister and there is supposed to be separation from those roles, the judiciary and a police minister or even a minister. Someone else raises the issue of the police commissioner. When Nash talked to the police commissioner about the possibility of a sentence review, why did the police commissioner, Andrew Costa, not report the discussion to the police minister at that time? Why has it only been revealed now? Does Costa need to do his job too. Another listener says, in the case of the murder of the police officer Hunt, the minister says exactly what the nation felt. It would be appalling if he was punished for that. The Prime Minister can't cherry pick which portfolios Nash can keep or lose. In doing so, he is prioritising short-term political interest over a fundamental principle underpinning Parliament's relationship with the judiciary. The revelation today that Nash has made this mistake before only underscores the point. He hasn't learned. He's twice breached the Cabinet manual. He should go. 2101 on text. It is 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The collapse of 2 US lenders has stoked fears about the health of the global banking industry. Markets have been in turmoil, dragged down by a major European bank, Credit Suisse, which suffered its biggest sell-off ever. Its shares tumbled by 30% at one point in Wednesday's trading, prompting Swiss regulators to declare they would prop it up if needed. So how exposed are the Australian owners of our biggest banks? ABC reporter Eleanor Whitehead has the story.
Silicon Valley Bank was the biggest US lender to go bust since the global financial crisis. After it failed last week, another American bank, Signature, followed, and fears about the health of the banking industry have rippled around the world. Markets have been in turmoil, dragged down by banking stocks, and the panic is centred on a much larger lender, Credit Suisse. Its shares tumbled by 30% at one point in yesterday's trading, after its biggest shareholder, the Saudi National Bank, ruled out providing it with fresh funding. Andrew Kenningham is the chief Europe economist with Capital Economics in London.
If confidence is not restored in the next day or two, then it is very possible that the government or the National Bank will have to intervene and will have to take over the bank and put it effectively in receivership.
Credit Suisse has been reeling from years of mismanagement and suffered an $8 billion loss in 2022. As panic set in on Wednesday, the Swiss central bank stepped in, declaring it would give a lifeline to the bank if needed. Trying to calm fears, Credit Suisse's chairman, Axel Lehmann, came out saying the bank won't need government assistance to stay afloat, but concerns about contagion and a deeper global economic crisis are rising.
Well, I think we're seeing some contagion because what happened in the US has got really no connection directly with what's happening in Switzerland, but this is a case of contagion. I think the question is going to be how bad the contagion will be and how long it will persist.
So what are the risks to the banking sector, both internationally and in Australia? Dr. Angela Jackson is lead economist at Impact Economics and Policy. She says one worry is over banks' exposure to government bonds. The value of those bonds has plunged as central banks hike interest rates, potentially causing hidden problems.
The markets are, I guess, realising that, if banks do get into trouble and have to sell those bonds and realise those losses, that it could create instability. I think it also just reflects a lot of uncertainty in the markets around the prospect of further rate rises and what that's going to mean globally in terms of the economy.
After the global financial crisis, regulators around the world introduced tighter rules, meaning that banks are more highly capitalised today. So is there any chance of another 2008?
I think it's quite different for a number of reasons. I mean, that financial crisis was really triggered by people not being fully aware of the risks associated with some of the products being held by banks. In this case, what we're really talking about is the risks associated with the holding of government bonds, which is pretty clear. And most major financial institutions and the bigger banks will have hedged those risks adequately. Where the markets, I think, are concerned is, as we saw with SVB last week, they hadn't hedged those risks adequately and they got caught out. Are there other examples of that across the system?
Where does Australia sit in all of this? How exposed are our banks to some of these concerns?
Look, we have, very strong, regulatory oversight of our banks. So I think we're not as exposed. We're not likely to see banks here facing these types of issues. That said, that will be impacted by, obviously, the general sentiment.
The turmoil, underpinned by higher interest rates, is raising questions about the next round of hikes. There's speculation that central banks, including the Reserve Bank of Australia, might be inclined to pause their hikes. But Angela Jackson thinks they aren't over yet.
Their main focus, I think, will remain inflation. Whether they pause for a month or so just to take stock and to try and make sure some of these risks are being managed, I think we'll have to wait and see. But ultimately, the course of monetary policy has been clearly set, and that is to get inflation back within the target ranges of the global central banks of 2 to 3%, and we're still a long way from that.
Across the ditch, Malcolm Turnbull has become the second former Australian Prime Minister to rubbish the AUKUS submarines deal. Yesterday, former Prime Minister Paul Keating gave a stinging rebuke, saying the plan was the worst international decision by a Labor government in 100 years. Mr Turnbull was not so cutting, but didn't exactly hold back either. The ABC's Oliver Gordon reports.
Former PM Paul Keating has called the AUKUS submarines deal the worst deal in all history. Malcolm Turnbull hasn't gone that far, but still believes we should have gone with the French vessels.
The reality is this will take a lot more time, cost a great deal more money, have a lot more risk than if we had proceeded with the submarine project we had with France that Morrison recklessly cancelled.
His list of concerns is long. One centres around the type of uranium the AUKUS subs will use. He says the French submarines we were going to acquire used a less dangerous uranium.
The American and British naval reactors use weapons-grade uranium. In fact, the uranium is taken from nuclear weapons that have been, in effect, decommissioned. It's enriched to 95%, so it is the most dangerous substance on the planet.
That, in Malcolm Turnbull's view, will lead to regulatory headaches down the track.
You could have a civilian nuclear industry, a naval nuclear propulsion, using low-enriched uranium and with the same supervisory, regulatory regime, and people can move between the two. That's not going to be possible for us.
He's also raised concerns about the health of the British economy.
The bottom line is their economy is sick.
And he's disappointed such a mammoth deal has not faced much public scrutiny.
Regrettably, there has not been a fully transparent public debate.
Sydney University Professor of Modern History James Curran agrees.
I just wonder why there hasn't been a parliamentary debate, why there hasn't been a major parliamentary statement by successive ministers for defence, foreign affairs, by the Prime Minister, why there hasn't been a white paper.
He's not questioning the need for submarines, but says the Albanese government needs to do more to convince Australians why these particular vessels are the best option.
We need a deterrent in a region where China is rising, but no one's made the argument for why this deterrent in particular.
Paul Keating's remarks yesterday were critical of the AUKUS Defence Pact. He doesn't believe it's a solution to the challenge of great power competition in the region. So what impact will the acquisition of these new submarines have on the country's relationship with Beijing? James Lawrenson is the director of the Australia-China Relations Institute at the University of Technology, Sydney.
Clearly, China's not going to like it. Beijing sees that it's contrary to its interests, but I'm expecting a fair bit of diplomatic bluster and maybe some go slow on removing the trade restrictions, but not much beyond that.
But he says the new submarines add another complex layer to Australia's relationship with China, and wishes the Australian public was offered the chance to discuss the merits of the deal before it was committed to.
It's not about being blanket against AUKUS. It's just about, given the costs, given the technical complexities, given the lack of a strategic rationale, and look, some of the blowback as well. I mean, it is possible that China's going to look at this and, see Australia in a different light, and it could actually paint a target on our back. So you put all that together and you at least need an open public debate, and we haven't had that.
The Albanese government has defended the AUKUS policy, which has bipartisan support, claiming it will strengthen Australia's national security and contribute to regional stability. In response to former Prime Minister Keating's critical comments about senior Labor ministers yesterday, Defence Minister Richard Marles has responded, singling out Foreign Minister Penny Wong as one of the greatest foreign ministers the country has had.
Grief has turned into rage in Greece 3 weeks after the deadliest train crash in the country's history, killing 57 people. Hundreds of thousands of people have been protesting across the country as demonstrators vent their anger and more protests are planned. The BBC's Louisa Pilbeam has more.
57 people died here, many of them teenagers and young people with their lives ahead of them, in what was the worst train crash Greece has ever seen. How could this happen? The question bringing thousands of people onto the streets of Greece. Among the protests, this in Athens, 12,000 people angry and demanding this never happens again on the country's railways. They're afraid of a government cover-up and say the country's rail infrastructure is old and dangerous. A week ago, these protests in the capital turned violent, Greek police using tear gas. Passenger and freight services on the route linking Athens and the northern city of Thessaloniki have been halted since the crash between the passenger train and freight train on the same piece of track 2 weeks ago. The Transport Minister has confirmed the route will reopen gradually next week. 4 railway officials have been charged over the disaster, but more protests are planned. On Thursday, flights to and from Greek airports will be grounded as air traffic controllers join a 24-hour nationwide strike over the crash, which many feel was a disaster waiting to happen.
The number of wolves across large parts of Europe is increasing. These animals, once widely hunted, are returning to land they haven't lived in for more than a century. The BBC's Jessica Parker reports.
That sound you can hear is a wolf sniffing a camera on a stretch of heathland planted to track Belgium's emerging wolf population.
So have you ever seen a wolf here?
Yeah, quite often actually.
In the province of Limburg, I go out to try and find signs of the wolf with Jan Hui from the Research Institute for Nature and Forest. He knows what to look for.
So this is wolf feces?
This is wolf feces, yeah. And what remains after the rain is just some hairs of the prey.
Why are their numbers growing in Europe and why are they back in Belgium for the first time in over 100 years?
Yeah. The reason why they're back is mainly legal protection, because in Europe it started with the Berne Convention in 1970, and later on in 92 there was the Habitats Directive, which obliged all member states to consider the wolf as a protected species. From the early 90s, really a lot has happened in Europe, and the wolves really started to disperse all over the continent.
What does the wolf eat? Deer? Wild boar, but livestock also makes up around 15% of its diet here, according to analysis. Local farmer Johan Scheuteren tells me he's lost dozens of sheep and current compensation doesn't cover the true cost.
We're in a huge barn here. Johan, how many sheep do you actually have in here at the moment?
For the moment, I think 800.
Out in the fields where Johan's sheep graze, he shows me the fencing he's built.
We have guardian dogs to protect our sheep against the wolf, but still we have some attacks.
Some people might say you just need to build a better fence.
Yes, what have you do more? We can use more wires, use more sticks, but I don't think that there is a wolf-proof fence doesn't exist. The wolf is so smart, he overwins every fence. Come.
Johan calls his sheep. Farmers' distress has led EU lawmakers to call for a downgrade in the wolf's protected status. A controversial cull was recently carried out in Sweden.
Oh, here we have another wolf print.
Back out on the trail with researcher Jan, he says people must again learn to live alongside the wolf.
And that is about all we've got time for. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up speaks to Coromandel tourism operators who fear visitors will stay away for the Easter break due to the fragility of the region's roads. Do tune in for that. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Former Police Minister Stuart Nash is facing fresh criticism after revelations he was reprimanded by the Attorney-General for discussing an ongoing court case on Talkback Radio. Education Minister Jan Tinetti told striking teachers their demands over pay and conditions have been heard during a rally at Parliament today. The government's subsidising a freight ship that's running an emergency route between Gisborne and Hawke's Bay for another 3 months at a cost of $3 million. Cyclone damage saw the road trip from Gisborne to Napier increase from 3 to 9 hours. And after 2 failed attempts, the Prime Minister has finally visited Wairoa more than a month after the town was hit by Cyclone Gabrielle. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
The Saturday morning actor and vintner Sam Neill has written a memoir, Under Pressure. Veteran plantsman Gordon Collier on his 3 famous gardens. Unlikely he has any velvet worms. Professor Peter Dearden is an expert though. Call Kim Hillahoe. Join me Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Kia ora, I'm Evie Ashton. It's 29 minutes to 7 and you're listening to Trending Now. On the detail today, no landlines, no cell phone coverage, no internet. Everything went down in Gabrielle. How do we stop it from happening again? Tom Kitchen has more.
There is growing concern about sections of Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti, with communications almost completely wiped out by this storm. Wairoa in particular is a black hole with cell phones, landlines and internet all down.
Cut off by road and phone, its residents are desperate to contact their loved ones.
Damage from heavy rain, flooding and high winds have toppled power lines, have cut fibre optic cables and shut down cell phone towers.
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, landlines out, cell coverage gone, internet non-existent.
Our community are really doing it tough, not being able to communicate, letting their whānau know they're okay.
People are struggling, but you can't get hold of them at the moment because all our communications are down.
Why did Cyclone Gabrielle cause the